I'm tempted to think that the Quran announces or expresses a criticism of Christian teaching, of the divine sonship of Christ. In the context of this story, it signals an awareness that the story comes from a Christian background, and so as though the Quran were saying, "Listen, I'm going to tell this Christian story or retell this Christian story, but don't get confused. I'm not endorsing or promoting Christianity." And so it adds this. I think of it as sort of parallel to when the Quran mentions the miracles of Jesus. It adds by the permission of God, and it doesn't do that for the miracles of Moses or other, say, I don't know, Saleh or some other prophet.
Yeah.
Only with Jesus, as though it were to say, like, yes, Christians tell this same story about this miracle, but I just really want to make it clear, I'm not endorsing their teaching on Christ. So
Yeah, maybe. I mean, of course, I benefited so much from your books and everything you published on the transmission of biblical characters into the Quran. So I will take anything anything you speculate.
thank you. That's
Um,
very kind.
and
That's very
and
kind.
of course, you are right that there might be a theological dimension there. I'm not a theologian, so I would just leave that part to you. Um,
Okay.
and on top of that, I am not sure how the mechanisms of that would work. Like, of course, Muhammad, while narrating these stories, I'm sure he knew that the stories were well known by Christians, and there were Christians in the audience as well. Social historical reconstruction is just affirming us that there were Christians, Jews, and
That's right.
pagans
Yeah.
in Muhammad's various audiences in various cities. So it is only expected that he might have actually narrated them in a way to emphasize that this is a new interpretation. But to what extent that
Yeah.
was Muhammad's personal theological agenda, to what extent that was a later addition and amendation. And of course, Muhammad also did not have one particular agenda throughout his life. His theology, as far as we can see in the Quran, changes between Mecca and Medina. So I think there are multiple layers of theological interpretation that went into the formation of the Quran
Yes.
that I totally take that there must be that reorientation of the Christian story, but I don't
It's
know
hard to be
whose idea
definitive.
it was.
Yeah, it's hard to be definitive about that. I want to get onto one more topic around storytelling before maybe at the end we can discuss a little bit your newest project on militarism in the early medieval Middle East. So in your book, you discuss cases where there are Christian saints who have a new identity in Islam. We actually sort of began with that with Anthony the Great in the very first discussion we had at the opening. Here, you mentioned that case, but there are other cases as well. I also wanted to just ask your wisdom about sort of the disposition of medieval Muslim authors towards Christian holy people. I mean, this may be too theological, but I mean it's sort of problematic to say that this or that Christian is holy, right? Because I mean, in order to be properly holy, maybe even to be properly moral, you should have the moral capacity to recognize that Islam is a true religion. So, the very fact that this or that monk or this or that saint is Christian and not Muslim, how could you really have a positive assessment of them? That's very vague. I don't know if your thoughts about that. So that could mean that the only way to tell a story about this or that Christian was to rename them and turn them into Muslims. Is that the case, or does certain cases sort of transcend that?
Um, I thought a lot about that question while writing the book and beyond. Even I remember thinking about this question in the conference you put together a couple of years ago, and I was, I think, talking about Anthony there. So it's been an ongoing question in my head, like how does that Islamization happen? How do Christian saints.
Can I tell the story that might illustrate my thoughts better? Because I think my question was
Okay.
rambling and incoherent. I was riding with a couple of Muslim friends years and years ago. We were going into the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. We were just driving around, not really driving anywhere in particular, but there was a monastery on a hill, and one of the guys just shaking his head, and he was like, these monks, they don't do anything. They've got no job. They have no wife. They're just eating and drinking wine up there. He's just shaking his head, like there was something about like just being a monk must be bad in his mind,
Yeah.
obviously not all Muslims think that. But do you know what I mean? That's kind of what I'm thinking in the context of saints.
Yeah. So yes, multiple things. Yes. So not all the attitudes, of course, were positive. So there were many Christians who just criticized, many Muslims who just criticized Christian saints in terms of what they do and what they think, what they say. So you were right that that example probably applied to the medieval landscape as well. Um, and we should also remember that sanctity and holiness was also contested within Christianity too. Not every holy man was accepted everywhere. So that kind of questioning, assessing, and critiquing was not restricted to the members of the other religious community. It happened among Christians as well. So in my reading of all of these sources, I saw a broad spectrum of engagement from straight up refusal to very critical engagement, to Islamization, to veneration as a Christian. So it's a really broad spectrum. That was one of the major takeaways I hope I could articulate in the book. One thing very interesting, just to add to this, one thing that is very interesting is that I could not find a post-Islamic Christian saint who was venerated by Muslims. Most of the saints, Christian saints who
Oh,
were
really?
venerated by Muslims, they all date before the time of Muhammad.
Right.
So perhaps that was one of the ways in
So you
which,
have a chapter on from Paul and John to Fimyun and Saleh.
yeah,
So these are
love that story.
pre-Muhammadan or pre-Islamic saints, but even they get Islamic names and well, sort of Islamic names, at least Saleh does, and Islamic identities.
Right. So that happens to, as I said, Saint George, Fimun, and Saleh is a good example that you just mentioned. Um, Saint Anthony, as I was mentioning, Maruta of Meifarkat, and other saints as well. Of course, many biblical characters as well. But there is no like 7th or 8th century Christian saint that I found articulated and talked about and venerated in in Islamic texts. Um, maybe there is one, and it's just my poor
Yeah,
reading of sources.
yeah,
Maybe I'm sure like those cases must have existed, but if they did, if they do, it must be much rarer than the others. So I think there was that chronological boundary making. Anything that happened prior to Muhammad could be integrated into the Islamic tradition in a safer way, while later Christian saints, which we have of course hundreds,
yeah. Problematic.
the
Yeah,
engagement of communities with them is much more, I think, contested, and I don't see
reticent.
them in literature.
Yeah. Okay. I said that would be my last storytelling question, but I have one more. Do you think
Okay.
storytelling is per se subversive, a way of getting around sort of the religious men, the powerful religious men?
Maybe. I think in
Because you
many
have these
cases,
ulama, you have ulama and, the religious scholars
mm,
who are worried about saying, I mean, the Islamic case, this or that is required or forbidden or recommended, and they're dictating these things. I don't mean to present that in a bad light. I mean, it's a normal understanding of
yeah,
Sharia
of
and all
course.
of that. But by telling a story, you're not engaging those ulama on their terms, sort of getting around them, and you could sort of subversively maybe get a message across that says like there's a whole different way to think about God and the world and humans.
I think in the first chapter of the book, I tried to show that people all across the board told stories, and
Mhm,
that's not
mhm.
because we all that's not only because we all like telling stories, but that's also because there is a certain authority that comes with knowing so many stories. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right that once people start telling their own stories in the ways they want to, by adding the details that they imagine, it is a process of cultivating a certain authority and prestige and power, and that is of course a challenge to the authority, prestige, and power of the ulama. So it is absolutely, it was, and I think today it still is, a tool for cultivating authority. So you're right that it was subversive. How many people told stories with that intention in mind, that I don't know, of course.
Yeah.
But we can see in between the lines how ulama is, of course, discouraging people from over narrating stories, while people are narrating stories all across the board.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, true in Christianity as well as Islam. So I think it was quite a powerful way of destabilizing religious authority, intentionally or unintentionally.